Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Father James Martin. He is here to celebrate Learning to Pray, a guide for everyone. I had a fantastic time speaking with Father Jim, and no matter what your faith tradition may be, I think you're going to love listening to this conversation as well. Before we invite Father Jim into the studio, I want to invite you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com, where you can find out all about my brand new live event. The magic between us is respect and kindness. This is a beautiful program that can be presented live and in person when it's possible, and also virtually. It's a really, really fun program, and people are loving it. Margaret Kelly, who is the librarian at the East Boston branch of the Boston Public Library, one of my favorite places in the world, she says Jedley's performance of The Magic Between Us is Respect and Kindness is always a guaranteed hit at our library. His magic tricks amaze his audience, while his zany antics have them howling with laughter. Please take a minute to find out how I can bring some magic and some smiles into your community. Go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Parents Click Here button at the top of the page. Scroll on down to where it says Live Events. Joining us right now from New York City, I'm really excited to introduce our guest to you. We've just been chatting. It's like we're long-lost buddies who've never met each other in person. Please welcome to the show the author of Learning to Pray, a guide for everyone, Father James Martin. Father Jim, how are you?
I'm good. It was great catching up to talk to someone who is Jesuit educated from Boston, so that was kind of fun.
Yeah, it was. I have so many great memories. I'm a graduate of Boston College High School, which is an amazing institution, part of the whole BC, Boston College kind of family. But BC High is its own thing, and it's a very unique school and institution. And I just love the fact that I had a chance to go there and didn't get thrown out my first 2 years, which almost happened.
And you had some. We were talking about some of your great teachers, and I started my Jesuit training, my Jesuit career, if you could call it that, in Boston, in Jamaica Plain, and so I really feel like Boston is my spiritual home. So we probably shouldn't bore all the listeners with all the different Jesuits we know in common.
But one thing I would like you to do is just talk a little bit about what the Jesuits are.
Sure. So the Jesuits are a Catholic religious order. What does that mean? It means that we're like the Franciscans, the Dominicans, the Trappists, the Benedictines. We live in community. I literally live in a community with 12 other Jesuits. We take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. In the United States, we're best known, we were just talking about, for our work in education, which is very appropriate for this podcast. We run not only high schools like BC High and colleges like Boston College, but today we run middle schools like the Cristo Rey model schools, which people might know about. We run nativity schools all over the country, and so we're very well known for our education. We also run parishes and retreat houses, and we work with refugees and, pretty much any occupation you can imagine someone doing, we do as Jesuits. So, but yeah, and our spirituality can be summed up, I think, as you know well, in finding God in all things. Mm-hmm. But I think in the United States, people know us mainly for our schools and our powerhouse basketball teams as well.
I love the nativity model for middle school, really giving that education to kids who most need it in underserved communities.
Yeah, thanks. And I had a little brain freeze. Yes, nativity schools are middle schools, absolutely, and Cristo Rey schools are high schools. And nativity school model is a model where you have small classrooms. It's usually in places where the kids are at risk, maybe in poorer neighborhoods. I worked in a nativity school myself for a couple months. And then the Cristo Rey model for high schools is really creative as well. It brings in kids and they offset their tuition by working by working part-time in local businesses, which is pretty cool because then they get the experience. And yeah, both of these, I mean, I'm so proud. I don't work directly in Jesuit education, but I'm so proud of the nativity schools, the Cristo Rey schools, the high schools, the colleges. It's something, I mean, Jesuits aren't supposed to be proud, but, I'm proud of our, as we say, educational apostolates.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you were able to share a little bit about your community with us, because I think that really is, probably has a lot to do with what inspired you to write Learning to Pray.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it came out of my experience as a Jesuit, but it really is, as the subtitle says, it's a guide for everyone. And so you don't have to be Catholic. You don't have to be someone who knows what a Jesuit is. It's really meant for people who, are just starting to pray, but also for people who pray regularly and need a little pointers, because I think there's so many misconceptions about what prayer is. And that goes, and I talk a lot about childhood prayer in the book as well, right, which I think is probably appropriate, for parents and teachers to consider, because I think kids are naturally disposed to prayer, but they're sometimes not encouraged to do it.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Kids, I think kids do, and I think kids naturally have conversations with God.
Yeah, I think they're less self-conscious, shall we say. And you know more about teaching kids than I do, but I think they're less self-conscious. I think they're more imaginative in their minds. Not all kids, of course. And I talk in my book about an early experience I had where, I was going to school and had this pretty profound experience of God's presence, not because I'm some saint or some mystic, but because, kids are open to those kinds of things. But again, they're not encouraged to talk about them very much, for a number of reasons. So in the book, I talk about ways that we can recognize children's natural spirituality and their natural spiritual bent.
You're mentioning a spiritual moment when you're a kid. When I was a kid, oftentimes my mom would go to the Franciscan Friary in Brookline, Mass. For confession, probably because she didn't want the priest at St. Mary's to figure out who she was. But they had this statue of Jesus in a wall, and he was behind bars. It was when he was imprisoned, and he's there with the crown of thorns. And when I was waiting outside for my mom to come out, I crawled in between the bars and was sitting next to Jesus.
Wow.
And having a conversation with him, about, that must hurt, and I really feel bad. I'm sorry that you're hurting. And I felt that kind of profound spiritual moment that you were kind of talking about.
Well, I think thanks for sharing that with me. I think that's really beautiful. And I think that kids, like you were at that age, not self-conscious about that. You'd be much more self-conscious about it as an adult. And you might even question what was happening, right, to you, sort of that feeling. But I think that happens a lot. And I think that we need to invite kids to see those opportunities to pray as something that's available to them, but also to take those seriously. The other thing is to take those seriously. Those spiritual experiences are just as important, as someone who goes on a retreat, who's an adult. So that's really a beautiful encounter. Of course, you and I couldn't probably fit through those bars these days. So.
I was going to say that, yeah, and I wouldn't have gone back because people were angry at me when they found me. That's
not interesting when you think about it. I mean, the irony that, they're angry about this kid who wants to talk to Jesus, right?
Yes. It was a different time 100 years ago.
Well, very true.
Hey, tell me, Father Jim, a lot of times when we talk about communal prayer, and especially in our church, we talk about people sitting down and just reciting a rosary, Hail Mary, Our Father. Are there ways for families to pray together that aren't just that rote reciting of a prayer?
Yeah, there are. And I don't want to, and I know you're not doing this, I don't want to denigrate rote prayer and standard prayer, because those are very appropriate. I mean, I pray the rosary, I pray the Hail Mary, I pray the Our Father. I mean, after all, Jesus taught us the Our Father, so I think it's a great prayer. But I think, your experience shows that prayer can be a lot more than that or other than that, right? So the kind of prayer you were doing is just another way of doing it. And, one way I encourage parents to pray with their kids is to get them to verbalize their prayers to God as if they're speaking to a friend. So to say something like, what would you like to ask God today? What would you like to say to God today? And it can be pretty surprising. I remember a couple of years ago, he's 15 or 16 now. My nephew and I were in church during Christmas. He must have been about 7 or 8. And I said, let's go visit the Christmas crib, right? So the little creche, the nativity scene. And there was Jesus, I think it was Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. And there's Jesus in the manger. And I said to my nephew, what would you like to say to him? And I thought he would say something like, oh, Jesus, give me a good toy for Christmas. He said, make me a good boy, Jesus. And I thought that's a lovely prayer. And, that's the kind of thing that a parent can do, right? To sort of encourage the kid to verbalize the prayers, maybe even writing a letter to God, or just talk to the kid about prayer. How do you like to pray? How do you imagine God listening to you? And also I think the key for parents is to be open to what they say, because we as adults have very sort of, preconceived notions about what is quote unquote right or wrong, right? And to be open to the way that God is encountering your own child. I think that's really important. God, as people say often, meets us where we are, right? Mm-hmm. And so God met you, for example, in that church, in Boston, by sort of inviting you through the bars to a conversation with Jesus, which is it's a very adult way of praying, right? But sometimes, you might imagine a parent saying, oh, you shouldn't do that, don't do that. But yeah, so be open to how God is meeting your child.
Yeah, I think that's really important, but I think it's hard for parents. I don't know, for some reason it seems there are a lot of, not only Catholics, but there are a lot of folks that are just, they want to put God up there, which is where God belongs, but right. They put this wall between them. It's like God's up there, and and I worship you, God, thank you very much, but I don't want to, the relationship stuff's kind of scary.
I think that's a very good point. And I think, yes, God is up there, and we have to remember who we're talking to, right, the creator of the universe. But I think God also wants our friendship, and God wants our honesty and our companionship. And basically, God wants a relationship with us. And how do we know that? Well, one of the ways that we know that is because we desire that. I mean, we want to know. We want to be close to God. We have a desire for God. As St. Augustine said, our hearts are restless until they rest in you, right? So there's this kind of natural longing. And as I say in the book, where does that longing come from? It comes from God. I mean, that's the way that God draws you closer. And so it's not simply about worship, important as that is. It's about friendship and intimacy. It's very interesting. The spiritual writer Richard Rohr points out, which I until he said this, I never really saw it, that Jesus in the Gospels never says worship me. He says follow me, which is just different. It's a little bit more friendly, right? Follow me, not worship me. And of course we do worship, if you're Christian, you do worship Jesus, but it's just kind of a little insight, I think, that helps people understand the kind of relationship God wants with them and for them.
That's really beautiful.
Isn't that a surprise when you think about it? Yeah. He doesn't say that.
It is surprising, and it's comforting to me, to be honest with me, to know that God's kind of okay. He has a good self-esteem. He doesn't need us to pump up his self-esteem.
That's right. That's I've never heard it put it that way. Yes, I think God probably does have some self-esteem, being God. And, a lot of us like to think we're God. But yeah, right. And he wants us to, or God wants us to be in relationship, right? And so why not?
Yeah. Another Jesuit who's been on the podcast, Father Greg Boyle, talks about radical kinship and really working hard to find that kinship with everyone we meet. And I think maybe the best way to do that is to just have that kinship and that friendship with God.
I think that's right, because when you have that friendship with God, it softens your heart, it opens you up, and it therefore opens you up to other people. Prayer always changes you. And so if you're, let's say, for example, I think that I really found that image that you said at the beginning of the show really beautiful. I mean, if you sort of meditate on that image of you saying to Jesus, boy, that must hurt, what does that do? I mean, you could say, well, that makes me more compassionate towards people who are suffering today, right? That may make me more compassionate to people who are imprisoned. I have to say I worked at the Suffolk County House of Corrections in downtown Boston for a couple of years as a Jesuit during my Jesuit training. And so something like that, something simple like that meditation can open up your heart and help you see the world in a different way and bring you into what Greg Boyle calls, beautiful phrase, radical kinship. So it does, prayer transforms us as well. It's not just about me and God, as important as that is. It's about God transforming me and helping me become a more loving person, or a more loving parent, or a more loving teacher.
Yeah. We talk here in the show about the value of sitting down and reading with our kids every night for 15, 20 minutes. I'm guessing that you would say that there's a great benefit to sitting down and maybe after you finish reading, just taking a moment, as you were saying earlier, Jesuits like to find God in all things. Sitting down and talking with your kids about where they found God in the different moments of their life that day.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a Jesuit prayer that I talk about in the book called the Examination of Conscience, which I'm sure they taught you at BC High, which is basically a review of the day. And you can, there's an example in the book of a father talking to his 8-year-old son about what happened during the day, and him helping him find all sorts of places where God was. And the son says, "Oh, you missed something," and points out something to the father. So, yeah, I think asking the kid to talk about where he or she might have experienced God, where did he or she feel like they turned away from God. And it's usually, in my experience, I don't have a child, obviously, in my experience, from parents who tell me this, it's just as satisfying for the parent. I mean, in other words, the parent is often in awe of not only the natural holiness of the kid, right, but also that the child is helping the parent see places that the parent or teacher might be overlooking, right? And in fact, that's the example I use in the book, that the parent's actually overlooking this pretty profound moment of God's presence, and that the kid says, "Wait a minute, Dad, you missed it. This is where God was." So I think it's a really nice exercise for a kid. It's also very it's very easy to do. I mean, you're not saying to the kid, "Okay, imagine you're, Moses and you're whatever." It's not a difficult sort of imaginative contemplation. It's just saying, let's talk about your day. What happened today? And where do you think God was in your day? That's an easy question, I think, for a kid to answer.
Yeah. And I love, too, that in that examination, kids have a chance to think, where did I turn away from God today? Where could I have had a better relationship with God? And I think that would be an important thing for a parent to share, too, with their kid, to let the kid see that, hey, I'm not perfect, and I'm working on this thing, too.
Oh, for the parent to share that with the child as well.
Yeah,
right. And, maybe the parent lost their temper, or, was short with the kid, or, short with the spouse or something like that. And I think that's important. I think it's also important for the child to see that the parent takes their faith seriously, because a lot of times it's, we can be sincere in our faith, but the kid wonders, like, if you're, if all we do is say grace on Thanksgiving and Christmas and go to Mass, twice, whatever it is, that the child might think that it's really not that important, because kids are pretty attentive and they notice, what does the parent spend a lot of time on? Is it their cell phone, or is it, what is it? What's valuable to the parent? And I think kids really pick up on that.
Absolutely. We talk here in the show a lot about how parents can help kids visualize how they can solve problems by reading books together. Learning to pray is a great way for parents to help kids develop that relationship and develop that habit of prayer. And so we're oftentimes talking about how parents can help kids through books. You've written a book not too long ago that I think a kid could really help, especially a teen or a tween, can really help a parent with. And that's your book, Building a Bridge, how the Catholic Church and the LGBT community can build bridge. I know I'm killing the title, but
that's okay. It's a long subtitle.
But I think that this idea of having relationships, having friendships, having radical kinships with our LGBT brothers and sisters is a little bit harder for old guys like me than it is for my kids who were tweens and teens. Well, now they're in their 20s.
That's a good point. And I sometimes think that, so the book is about how the Catholic Church can reach out to the LGBT community and treat them with respect, compassion, and sensitivity, which is in the Catechism. And you are absolutely right. The younger generation, I'd say, I mean, even down to like high school, college, are much more comfortable with this topic, because they have friends who are LGBT, or they're used to it from pop culture or from their reading, and it's just something that sometimes they're more advanced in terms of their understanding and their tolerance, or their welcome, you could say, or their inclusion is a better word, than their parents are. And it's very funny you should bring that up, because oftentimes I'll talk to kids who are in college who say, my parents reject me, or they have problems because of their, religious beliefs, even though I don't think it should conflict, or my grandmother or whatever. And I sometimes say to the young person, usually this is a college student, that you may know more about this topic than they do. Mm-hmm. And so you need to be patient with them. So I'll give you an example. I was talking to, I don't think this is breaking any confidences. I was talking to my nephew who is 15, and he was talking about a person in the school who was transgender. And I said, well, how do you treat this person? And he was shocked. And he said, I treat him fine. Why would I treat him differently? And I just thought, boy, now that is just, so for him, it's less about, whether or not the child is transgender, right? Or, mm-hmm. or LGBT or whatever. It's just, this is my friend, mm-hmm. And he actually said, oh, he's really funny. So everybody likes him. So I think that the younger generation is just a little more advanced. And yeah, I think that book, Building Your Bridge, which is written on a fairly, inviting level, would mm-hmm. be a great conversation starter.
Yeah, absolutely.
For parents.
Absolutely, yeah. You were mentioning grandparents maybe having a hard time with this. I have this great memory. My grandmother was awesome. She was my best friend. She'd ride in the back of my motorcycle, go to the pro wrestling matches with me at the garden.
That's great.
But I came home one day with an earring, and she said to me, now, does that mean – it doesn't make any difference one way or the other, but does that mean that you're gay? And I said, no, it doesn't. She goes, oh, okay, well, I have some great earrings if you want. You're welcome to them.
And what year would that have been?
That was, I think, 83, 82.
That's amazing. I mean, to say that in 1983 as a grandparent is mm-hmm. amazing.
Yeah.
And, I have to say, I mean, this is sort of off topic, but one of the things that is the best predictor of how LGBT kids are able to integrate themselves is how their parents and grandparents welcome them or don't welcome them. Mm-hmm. And it's a really important thing. I mean, just something, I think that's such a beautiful little story. Like, it's okay if you were. Mm-hmm. And she's asking, and she's kind of putting it on the table and making it okay. That if you had been gay, that would have been a huge thing for you, right? Mm-hmm. To just be so welcome. So, yeah. So anyway, the book, I think the book would be a good conversation starter for people.
Yeah. Father Jim has, a whole library of books that he's written. There's a lot of humor in there. If you ever have a chance to see him speak, go for it, because it's very entertaining, very enlightening, and very inspiring. Father Jim, are there places to go to learn more about you and your books?
Yeah, sure. So Learning to Pray, which has just been released, is available, as they say, everywhere books are sold, so online in bookstores. It's available in print version, ebook version, and audio. I did the audiobook myself. And then to, kind of keep track of what I'm doing, I have a public Facebook page under Father James Martin, S.J., and I am on Twitter and Instagram under James Martin, S.J. That's S.J. for Society of Jesus. So, yeah, I hope you enjoy, and I really hope your listeners enjoy Learning to Pray, because I think it's, and there are a lot of stories about kids' prayers and my own experience and other children and young people praying. So I think it'll be helpful and informative for your listenership.
That's absolutely. We've had a great time speaking with the author of Learning to Pray, a guide for everyone, Father James Martin. Father Jim, thanks so much for being part of the show.
My pleasure. And what do I say? Go Eagles for BC High. Is that right?
There you go.
My pleasure.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Yvette Davis. She'll be here to celebrate her Adventures of Sunny series. It's a really fun conversation. You don't want to miss it. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, you may be frustrated by the fact that it is so hard to market your book. And you're not a marketer, you're not a PR person, you're an author. And how can I do this by myself? Well, you don't have to do it by yourself. We have a great program. It's called the Certified Great Read Program. If our panel believes that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a Certified Great Read. And with that status comes a number of really fantastic tools that can help your book stand out from the crowd of books that are published every single month. Do you know there are literally thousands of books published every single month? No exaggeration, thousands. How can your book stand out? We can help. The Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read Program. Find out about it by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button. Scroll on down to where it says Certified Great Read. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so very wonderful. Of course, we want to thank our guest, Father James Martin. Be sure to check out Learning to Pray, a guide for everyone. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Alexia Brown, Hannah Pat Oboyski. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank Augie the doggy for having my back here in the studio. But most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you so much for being your kid's parent, your kid's cook, your kid's teacher, their Uber driver. Thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading and praying with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.